Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Theodora Scarrato, Executive Director with Environmental Health Trust, and I'm here today with Stephanie Kerst, who is a certified building biologist, specifically an electromagnetic radiation specialist. And she's also the founder of Sage Living, which is based in the San Francisco Bay Area. She does remote sessions and supports families, architects, home builders, and people and organizations that are working on having safer interior spaces in terms of electromagnetic radiation. And I'm really thankful to have you here today to share what you do, how you do it, and the solution to moving forward on this incredibly important issue.
Thank you, Theodora. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here. As you said, I am an electromagnetic radiation specialist. So I'm a building biologist that specializes in EMF or EMR, electromagnetic fields, electromagnetic radiation, with homeowners to come in to a home and make it a cleaner space in terms of EMF. And each home I found is its own unique puzzle. It's interesting. About half of my clients are precautionary and about half are symptomatic. They may have symptoms of electromagnetic hypersensitivity and be very sensitive to EMF exposure, particularly radio frequency radiation exposure. And so depending on what the client is looking for, I come in, I'm hired to perform usually an on-site EMF inspection. And that involves measuring the 4 different types of man-made EMF, AC electric fields, AC magnetic fields, dirty electricity, and radio frequency radiation. I have professional grade meters. And as it happens, I sit down, I start with the client, and I present a lot of educational materials. Most often, they'll have a particular concern that they'll call me about. Stephanie, there's an electric utility pole in front of my house, and I'm worried about the exposure. I can see a cell tower from my bedroom window. How high is the exposure in my bedroom? Or perhaps they're simply just wellness-minded. They're a family, they watch what they eat, they drink a lot of water, they try to avoid using lots of plastics. And this is just a next step in their process of creating a healthy home. And so, as I said, each home is unique. I walk through the home with the client, I capture all of the data, and then we sit down together and I perform a risk analysis based on the building biology guidelines. And we determine where their numbers fall within the different risk assessment guidelines of building biology. And building biology, the guidelines are based on all of the thousands of medical studies that indicate that there is biological harm from low-level non-thermal exposure to non-ionizing radiation. So if we look at the electromagnetic spectrum, we know ionizing radiation, like X-rays, is damaging to human DNA. But what this field of science, in the past 30 years has started to show is that there are health effects from very low levels of non-thermal, non-ionizing radiation. And really, what I want to remedy is that cumulative, because remember, there are 4 kinds of man-made EMF. So what I really want to do is remedy the exposure to the cumulative long-term soup of exposure, if you will. And a lot of times that exposure, like I said, can be from external sources, power lines, cell towers. If there's none of that, then quite often, and especially where I live locally in the San Francisco Bay Area, you have a lot of people who are really big fans of technology. And so they have many, many smart devices. And if you think about every device that you have in your home that you control with your phone, each one of those is a source of radio frequency radiation, or RF, or wireless radiation. And so each time you bring in another device like that into your home, you're increasing your overall RF exposure. And so we'll sit down, we'll analyze the risk, and then I will give them solutions. And the goal really is I can give you 10 solutions, but what's most important, let's find the 2 or 3 that you're really going to comply with in the long term. What works for your lifestyle? So Do I advocate getting rid of your smartphone? Well, it would be healthier, but it's absolutely not realistic for 99.9% of my clients. So what kind of, can we just be smarter in how we use it? Can we think about opting in to our wireless technology rather than having it transmitting 24/7? And what I really want to do is tailor that solution set to the client. And we're going to start really small and simple. And we're going to say, for example, let's take your smartphone out from under your pillow, because people do sleep with them under their pillow, or off of your nightstand, and let's move it at least 6 feet away from you. Better yet, out of the room. Charge it, create a charging station in the kitchen, and put all devices there. Ideally, put them in airplane mode with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth off before you go to sleep. Start small, with those changes and see where we get from there. And the interesting thing about the work that I do, the technical data is very important because EMF is odorless, it's invisible, you can't hear it unless you have a meter in most cases. And so I really want to make it visible for people and show them the environment that they're living in, and give them the data. The data is really important. And I have a way that I present the data to clients where I've created charts and I've put different exposure levels and all of the studies with the different kinds of adverse health effects right there. And I simply write in the client's data and say, listen, this is where you fall in terms of some of these major scientific studies. And then look down at the bottom of the page, the real low levels, the bioinitiative recommendations or the building biology guidelines are really, it's where we'd like to get you to. And I think also looking at the ALARA principle, let's get the numbers down as low as reasonably achievable. And so we work on solutions from there. And the interesting thing that I've discovered while doing this work is that this is just as much of a coaching session as it is analyzing the technical data. This is very much a life coaching opportunity to look at the family's lifestyle and say, what changes can we make? I'm going to meet you where you are. And if that's simply starting by taking your phone out of your bedroom at night, let's start there. And then we can get much more in depth from there. The solutions are endless depending on the family's willingness to make change. But I'm going to meet them where they are. I'm going to empower them because most people have no idea, about EMF or about EMF and the health effects. But truly, I come in and I make this visible and I empower clients. And I say, don't take my word for it, but let's make some of these changes. Let's turn off your Wi-Fi router at night. I do find that smartphones and the Wi-Fi router in a home generally are the two strongest sources of RF, wireless radiation in a home, assuming that there's not a large cell installation in the neighborhood. And so really we start with those. And I love the idea of opting into the technology when you need it. And obviously, as we get more in depth, hardwiring where possible, using a lower emitting Wi-Fi router. If you do need Wi-Fi, there really is a broad solution set, depending on the client's wishes. And again, don't take my word for it. But for example, I had a client in the past year when we've all been working from home so much, who said, I just feel so drained at the end of the day. I'm a psychologist. I'm doing my counseling sessions exclusively online. And by 5 p.m., I'm toast. I'm exhausted. And so we made some changes. Primarily, it was lowering the electric fields at her workstation. And I received an email later that week saying, it's 5 p.m. and for the first time in as long as I can remember, I'm headed out for a run. And I love that. It makes my day, and it's why I'm passionate about this work. And it was a very simple solution set. Something a little bit more complex, I'm often asked to go do real estate pre-purchase inspections. If a potential buyer is looking at a home, often it's because they're concerned about a power line installation nearby. And in this case, this was a beautiful home with a large set of high voltage transmission lines running right across behind the backyard. And so based on the data and based on the levels of AC magnetic fields that we were able to detect and measure, I had advised that he walk away from the purchase, which is a really tricky conversation to have. I have a lot of data and studies and information that I share when we have those kinds of conversations, because sometimes you have to have difficult conversations. But the silver lining in this particular case was that he bought a simple, consumer-friendly, inexpensive EMF meter, and he went home to his current home and started measuring and realized the main electric panel shared a wall with his daughter's bedroom, in fact, where her headboard of her bed was. And it was very alarming. And he called me and I said, you know, I walked him through how to measure and what to do. And they ended up moving her bed to the other side of the room and opting out of the smart meter. And, you know, it's a wonderful story, right? He didn't end up buying this property that he was quite interested in, but he went home and he made a lot of positive change. So, and like I said, sometimes the solutions can be that simple.
Thank you for sharing those stories. I'm interested in actually hearing more about some stories of residences that you've measured. And someone had a question, which I wonder if could frame that, which is about, have you found the radio frequency radiation levels in and around homes in the vicinity of cell towers or small cells to exceed FCC limits?
So that is an excellent question, and a vital component of an on-site inspection is to take the ambient readings before you ever walk in a home.
Right.
What is going on in the neighborhood? And so I always take RF and AC magnetic field readings on all four corners of the property, anywhere that a family on a front porch or in a backyard eating area, or anywhere where a family might spend a lot of time. Because it's really useful information, because in this day and age, once you go into a home, obviously it becomes a lot more complex, particularly in terms of RF with all of our devices. So taking those ambient readings outside gives me a really good baseline. And I can share, speaking to RF in particular, to your question, I have not measured a cell tower or cell antenna installation that exceeded the FCC limits. But I will say, in a neighborhood, but I will say what I have measured are Wi-Fi routers in a master bedroom that emitted 2.5 million microwatts per square meter. And we know that the FCC guideline, the outdated guideline, is 10 million microwatts per square meter. And so the highest that I've seen is about 2.5 million, and that the client wasn't sleeping. And so we got rid of the router, we unplugged the extender down the hall, and took some measures to remediate the situation, and he slept better afterward. And I'm not surprised. So that's about 2.5 million microwatts per square meter is the highest reading that I've seen. And also, just to answer your question a bit more, the RF meters have an audio feature, and each RF source, whether it's your Wi-Fi router or a cell tower nearby, have a different audio signal. And so often I'll have a client walk with me and they'll say, Stephanie, I'm really concerned about the cell tower 2 miles away. And I'll say, okay, well, let's go out in the yard, and let's listen, and I can help them distinguish the sounds that they're hearing. And so that's a useful tool as well.
Thank you. So I think something that might be important to talk about also is how building biologists measure radio frequency and what a person's exposure is, which is different than the FCC, which simply averages the exposure so that you don't get to see the complex way that really to characterize what the exposure is, because they just average it all together, make it a percentage of FCC limits.
Absolutely. And really, from a building biology perspective, we want to look at those peak numbers. The RF radiation, it's constantly pulsing, and it's those pulses, it's that feature that is most bioactive on our bodies. And sometimes the meter, it's pulsing so frequently, especially at the higher frequencies, that it's hard to see with the eye. And so oftentimes, if there's an RF concern, I'll data log, and what that means is, go in a bedroom and run a 15, 30-minute, sometimes you could even do up to a 24-hour data log and really look at the RF exposure over time. Because the other thing to remember is that these measurements are going to change based on time of day, based on what's going on in the environment around you. So if I come in on a Tuesday at 10 a.m., it's a snapshot in time. And those numbers are very, very useful, but they might be different the next day or the following week. And so all of our measurements are peak measurements because the average number just, it doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you much for our purposes.
Right. So I have a kind of a detailed question, and I know there's actually several questions related to this kind of issue of small, everyday pieces of our life where we might be exposed, where we need a technology. I mean, we have a need. We're driving in the car. So the question is, in the car, when Google Maps gives us our itinerary, is it dangerous? What's the exposure? So what have you measured in cars? I know there's questions about to what degree is the location, which is a signal. I mean, I use a GPS that has no radiation, but it doesn't give me the real-time data on how to get where fastest. But can you talk about navigating in the car and then maybe go into the car a little more fully, which is a whole
Absolutely. So I think the most important thing being in a car is to understand, as most of us know, that a car is mostly metal. And so driving in a car, talking on the phone, or being on the phone, you're in a Faraday cage. And so the first bit of advice is to minimize the amount of time that you spend on your cell phone in your car as much as possible. I do notice you can plug in, if you have a Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter, you can plug in a USB cable and put it on a mount in your car and drive through different neighborhoods or different cities in your area. And you can really see a lot of fluctuation in RF values based on where the cell towers are, within your city or within your neighborhood. And that's a really interesting bit of data, if that's something that you're curious about, that you can do on your own. In terms of Google Maps, often what I will do is I will put an address into Google Maps on my smartphone. I will load it up. I'll have the route, and then I'll put it in airplane mode with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth off. And in my opinion, that's the safest way to do things. Obviously, if you have a non-RF separate GPS unit, like a Garmin, that's also the lowest RF way to go, if that's an option for you. You're absolutely right that you lose the real-time ability to understand if there's an accident up ahead, and you wouldn't get rerouted because you're not online. And so it's a bit of a give and take there. But I've measured 500,000 microwatts per square meter coming off of a cell phone. Right. More if you've got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on as well, right? Each of those is its own unique source of RF. And when you think about that pinging around in a car that's mostly metal, everything that you can do to keep it off or in airplane mode with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth off when you're in the car is worth doing, if that's an option for you.
How about if I have a question, if the cell phone is embedded in the dash, is it safer? And I wonder with your question, Pascal, if you mean that if it is connecting to, I have an older car, so I don't know anything about the dash, but I know these new cars have all kinds of electronics in the front. There's ways you can connect the phone to the car. Is there a way for there to be the antenna outside, which of course doesn't protect outside, but perhaps, can you talk about that, about sort of levels of reducing, remembering that the Garmin or off is the safest way to do this?
So what you want to keep in mind is that I would much rather have the phone mounted on the dash or somewhere else. I don't want it sitting in your lap. Proximity with RF makes a really big difference. It makes a huge improvement the farther it is away from you. So if it's in your lap, I'd much rather have it mounted up on the dash. A lot of the cars today do have all kinds of sensors. I read about even a new radar technology that they were going to employ as an alarm to let parents know if they had inadvertently left a child in the car. And it was being touted, as a big safety improvement so that no child would ever accidentally get left behind in a car on a hot day. But each of those sensors and those features increases, your overall RF exposure. And really, cars, in terms of exposure, an older car is much better than a newer car, because the newer cars have so many sensors and bells and whistles, a lot of which are, Wi-Fi or Bluetooth enabled. And so each car should be tested before you buy it, especially if you're electrically sensitive. Generally speaking, older is better. And then really go into the settings in the car. Can you turn off the Bluetooth? Can you turn off the Wi-Fi? Then have a consumer-friendly RF meter, and you can measure and validate, that the RF is indeed off, because sometimes it does turn off and sometimes it doesn't, is what we've discovered. And so ideally, you would like to be in an older car with fewer bells and whistles, with the ability to turn Wi-Fi and Bluetooth off, and then use smart habits with the way that you use your phone in the car is really your best bet. And, perhaps some people will put their phone in a shielded bag. It only takes a fraction of a microwatt to connect and receive a phone call, but it would greatly diminish your overall RF exposure. So there are different measures that you can take, but bottom line is you really want to minimize your phone use when you're in your car.
Right. I feel like it was a journey for me when I first learned about this, in terms of what I did. First it was, okay, I'll keep the cell phone away from myself. And then I started using my home cordless phone all the time, thinking it was safer, unaware, because I hadn't learned a lot, that in fact the home cordless phone base was what was giving me the most exposure, kind of localized, because I had it right at my desk. It was literally like 5 inches from my head, the way it was situated. And there are so many people who I talk to who have that home cordless space in their bedroom and aren't aware about that it is like, it's kind of like a mini cell phone tower, is how I would
describe it. Absolutely is. And most of them have a battery backup. And so even if you unplug it, it will still transmit for quite a long time. And so the best bet, honestly, is to get rid of them, because they can be an incredibly strong source in a home. And quite often they're on, someone's nightstand. And so you really start to become a detective. Oftentimes clients will not even realize, oh, that's an old router. I didn't realize that was still even plugged in. And you can end up doing, so much good by locating these sources. And obviously shielding from RF is complex. It can get very expensive, and you can make things worse. And so you really need to know what you're doing. And so what we come back to is, let's identify the sources. Let's remove the sources. Then you don't have to spend any money to shield them. Let's look at using distance as a solution, and let's look at safer alternatives. And I really have two kinds of clients. I have the clients who say, I want you to come in and perform an inspection in my home for me. I'd like to make smarter choices to minimize my EMF exposure. And then you have the clients that I would say are looking ahead a bit more, that have a sense, that know a little bit about the topic of EMF. And so I'm brought in to advise on remodels or rebuilds. And, there are a handful. The best time to make protective measures is when the walls are open, right? And that's not usually the case for most of the clients that I see, but for those remodel clients, when you say, okay, would you like MC cable installed? It's more expensive than traditional Romex wiring, but you're going to have 24/7 protection from AC electric fields. You won't have to use a sleep switch. You won't have to use, you don't have to turn off circuits at night. And especially while we're all working from home, you can have a fully powered office with minimal AC electric fields. We look at solutions for RF. Is there any shielding that can be put in the walls if there is external RF? Maybe we look at the dirty electricity levels and we decide if we're going to how we're going to filter dirty electricity. Where I live in California, we have a lot of solar and we have a lot of pools and variable speed pool pumps, and it creates a lot of dirty electricity on the grid. And so oftentimes you need to install filtration next to the main electric panel. And then of course, the wonderful thing about building biology, so you can look at these types of EMF measures if you're ever doing construction, doing a remodel, or doing a rebuild, and it's the best time to do them because the walls are open and it's easily accessible. And then it, of course, segues into all the other wonderful aspects of building biology. Clients start to get curious about non-toxic building materials, light straw clay walls, clay plaster, and some of which can be, some of the building materials can be RF shielding as well, which is a really fun conversation when you can do it the right way the first time. And then we look at indoor air quality, or we talk about water quality. And again, I primarily work on EMF, but what I love is just the melding of all of the different ways that you can be really intelligent in creating a healthy home.
So tell us, I actually have two kind of separate questions that are almost the same. Like, for people who are new to the issue, what are like the first three things that are simple, easy, let's go on that issue? And then my second question is for people who have developed sensitivity. And I tell you, we are contacted every week by people who don't know anything about this issue. They had a cell tower installed outside their apartment building or on top of them. The most recent person had it literally, I kid you not, there's a bedroom and it was right there on the other side of the bedroom, and they are now ill. They have headaches, they're absolutely sick, and they need immediate help. They've left. Some people are able to leave, they have the means to do so. Many people can't, but even then they're still sick, right? Because it's everywhere, and they've been, they're in the next phase. It's no longer just to be at like the level. They've been injured, so then they're more sensitive to levels that they hadn't been before. So I have someone who just contacted us, they moved, but they can't get better, even though they know the levels are lower. So I'd be interested in things for them. And let's start with, go ahead.
You're absolutely right. You cannot heal well in an environment with high EMF. It's not possible. And it's really hard, as you said, once you're electrically sensitive and you have symptoms, it's a larger hill to climb to come back to health, and you are much more sensitive to lower exposure. And so let me jump back to the beginning of your question. What are the first few things that people can do? So it involves your smartphone. So I'd like it out of your pocket, unless it's off or in airplane mode with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth enabled. Even if it's in your handbag on your body, if you can periodically turn it off, put it in airplane mode with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth off, it's the best bet. When you think about distance and proximity, you can make large gains by simply moving it off of your body. So along with that, texting rather than holding the phone to your ear. Use speakerphone. It is possible to hardwire a smartphone. That can be done. But really think about where's the placement of your Wi-Fi router in your home? Is it at your feet in your home office? Okay, can we move it to the garage? Can we put it on a $10 cutoff switch that you can buy on Amazon that gives you a remote control that you can press a button and turn it off when you go to sleep at night, and then you wake up in the morning and you turn it back on when you wake up with a simple press of a button. And so really it's those measures that allow us to shift our mindset a bit and think about opting in to the use of it rather than having it run 24/7 the way that it does currently is an excellent first step that will be impactful. Now, for people who tragically have a new cell tower go in the neighborhood and they're feeling ill effects that they've never felt before, the first thing I would say is, if you have the ability, leave for a week. And because what we want to understand is, are your symptoms, we'd like to narrow down as much as we can to confirm that your symptoms are related, to the RF exposure from a cell installation. And so go camping, and really listen to how your body feels, because your body's going to tell you, if you're in a lower RF environment and you feel better, hey, there's something to it. Okay. So a cell tower, so armed with that data and understanding that, yes, I do feel that, the local cell installation is causing health problems for me. What do you do? Well, the RF, it's an external source of RF that sadly is beyond our control for the most part. So then you're looking, if you're not able to move, you're looking at shielding options. And I would always have a professional building biologist come in and take the measurements and help you with the solutions. But what I would say, the best solution for someone who has higher RF exposure, then is healthy and is making them ill, consider a bed canopy. Because at least at a minimum, you're giving yourself, it's an investment. They're $1,000, $1,500 each. So there is no doubt it's an investment. However, it is going to give you an uninterrupted 8 hours of no exposure. And we all know that when we sleep, it's our body's time to heal, our cells regenerate and rejuvenate. And so really trying to give your body a solid 8 hours in a bed canopy is probably a great first step to take. Now, shielding, like I said, can get complicated. So your best bet is always to work with a professional to make sure that it's installed correctly. And I know that it's expensive, but also it is a shielding measure versus painting or installing curtains or some of the other measures that you can take with you. So especially if you're a renter, it gives you some flexibility. You make a one-time investment in a bed canopy and you can take it with you if you move.
I want to highlight something that you just said. It is so important if you're doing shielding to have a professional, and that needs to be tested and retested, not just when you have a professional and you've done what you've done, but then over time, because things can change in terms of what's outside or what's entering your house. So people contact us a lot and say, I got the paint that shields, or I'm putting aluminum foil up, or I'm putting things up. And we always say, please hire a professional, because there's so many times where inadvertently an antenna that they didn't know about, they didn't have the measuring equipment to measure, is actually being heightened in their home because of the way the shielding can reflect. So that is so important.
Absolutely, because you can, as you said, with shielding, especially if you said, well, the cell tower is on my south wall and I'm going to paint that wall. And what you often can do is end up deflecting the waves within your home, and you can make it worse. And so, yes, shielding can be quite effective. It's just, it has to be done properly, especially before you make a large investment. Aluminum foil, as you said, can be a great shielding material. However, if you go through and you staple or put up aluminum foil everywhere, oftentimes it can cause mold, right? It can be a mold hazard, in wetter climates. So really, you need to, and that's another can of worms that we don't want to open up, particularly for someone who's electrically sensitive. So I cannot emphasize enough how important it is, if you're going down the route of shielding, to consult a professional. Now, you had also asked me for the simple beginning ways that we can reduce exposure to RF. And we're really focusing on RF because, as I've said in my practice, I see it's primarily smartphones, it's Wi-Fi routers. But now, in the last year and a half, when we're all working from home, we're all working most likely on our computers, on our laptops. And for 98% of us, we're on Wi-Fi, unless you've elected to Hardwire. And so I want to show you something interesting. And I have my Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter. When we talk about consumer-friendly EMF meters, this is a great one. And I won't go into it too much. If you look at the top number there, the peak number, it's constantly pulsing, and you're going to see it fluctuating. So I'm talking to you on a hardwired Ethernet connection. I don't have Wi-Fi on in the home. You can see it's fluctuating. Is it 239 microwatts per square meter? So in today's urban and suburban environment, it's very rare to see below 100 microwatts per square meter in some homes, particularly in San Francisco, because of how densely populated it is and because of all of the cell installations. So what I want to show you, though, is something that anyone can do. I'm going to just go up and turn my Wi-Fi on. My Wi-Fi is off right now, and this is just for demonstration purposes, but something really simple that you can do. Watch the meter. I think we hit, as I turn the Wi-Fi on, we went up to 40,000 microwatts per square meter. And you can see the max reading there in the middle. And then what I'm going to do is just go back up and turn my Wi-Fi off, and look, 2 microwatts per square meter. So again, this is just for demonstration purposes, but chances are, if you're sitting at home right now watching this or working on your laptop, what I would recommend doing, if you're writing a long email, turn your Wi-Fi off, turn it back on in 5 minutes to send the email. But again, it's an environmental toxin that we want to reduce exposure to. And for people who are unable to afford shielding and some of the fancier solutions that can sometimes be involved, something as simple as go offline while you can, while you don't need to be online. Again, it goes back to that philosophy of opting in to the exposure, opting into the technology when you need it. So for a student who is working at home, writing a paper with a Chromebook that was provided by the school during the pandemic, they've never heard of EMF. They may not have the means to make any large changes in the home. Well, that's a really simple one that can lower exposure while you're, for anyone, and while we're all sitting at home working.
Yeah, we have, we actually in Montgomery County, and I also know in California, where a PTA district has put up how to use safer technology. Here we had a student at the county public school actually testify to the board, just showing, look, here's the Chromebook, here's the adapter, and here's how you plug it into Ethernet. This is simple. It can be done. You have to finagle with the setting switches a little bit, which really, this should not be our job, right? None of this should be our job, but this is where we are. It should be the companies informing us, and that should be provided to all students, we believe, is how to have safer, faster, more secure school, and also address all the other non-radiation effects of screen time and related to education. But
absolutely. And I think that this is a vitally important topic for public health to continue to bring awareness to, and Environmental Health Trust does a stellar job of that. And what I really think the path forward is to continue educating and empowering individuals and families. But I think there is a huge opportunity to collaborate with technology companies, to work with product designers and create safer wired options. Or perhaps it's just having a choice, right? Perhaps it's having a fancy pair of headphones that you can use wirelessly, or you can plug them in, and just having the choice, much just like walking into a restaurant and being able to choose, would you like the non-smoking floor or the smoking floor, right? And at least allowing some choice. What if an iPhone came with an Ethernet cable and an adapter that was perfectly tailored to work with that smartphone? And the consumer was immediately given a choice, because I know how much an Ethernet cable costs, and I know how much an adapter costs. And in the grand scheme of things, it's not much compared to an iPhone. And if the product designers could create that perfect adapter and that perfect Ethernet cable specifically to work with that device, because it can be a bit cumbersome until you find the right adapter for your different devices. Each laptop has a different port. Almost all of them don't have Ethernet ports anymore. And so that's the path forward that I get excited about, because it also it involves work on their side, but it's a huge step for public health and to raise awareness about EMF and health. And also because it would allow them to tap into a market of EMF aware and electrically hypersensitive consumers who would absolutely snap all of those products up just to have a choice to be able to use them wired versus wirelessly.
Completely agree. And Dr. Davis has actually talked at several industry conferences, and we have written letters detailing the hardware and software changes that industry could make to do, as you talk about, to opt in rather than to have it always be wireless by default. Everything from, and Pascal, as you are stating in the question and answer, having a hard switch for those Wi-Fi routers, or even on your cell phone. It's so hard with the phone. You have to turn on airplane mode, turn off this antenna, turn off that antenna. And then some antennas come on when you do something, but you don't really know that you're attaching to the cloud. This doesn't need to be this way. It could be that we are starting off with safer technology and no EMF. And then if we choose to, for a reason which we recommend as low as reasonably possible, because there's so many ways that this can be addressed wired. There's so many wired options that we could have lifestyle changes and also occupational changes, and the way cities are designed, really, because I'm envisioning, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm envisioning not bring back the payphone, although I think that would be great, but having a place where you could plug in your phone, which has hardware that makes it easy. You just go, bump, you get your messages, the messages you typed go out. It's unnecessary that it always be radiating. This can be done with research and design.
Absolutely. And so I think that is a wonderful avenue that deserves a lot more exploration and a lot more attention, and it's interesting. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have the engineers from a solar company sit down with electrical engineers who are EMF experienced and talk about the best practices and talk about the design features that could be implemented to reduce the electromagnetic interference that comes off of a photovoltaic system, enabling the unit to run cleaner, and from our EMF perspective, reducing the dirty electricity that's emitted into the grid and emitted into our homes. And so there's really an opportunity for collaboration there. And what I do say to clients is start small, start in your home and with what you can control. And then and it's really twofold. The data that I capture and share with you and analyze is vitally important, but it's also really important how you feel. I can talk all day long about this until I'm blue in the face, but say you turn off your circuits for 7 days, and then you tell me I slept through the night for the first time in 8 years. I'm not going to need to educate you anymore. I'm not going to need to convince you or show you any more scientific studies about, EMF and health at that point. You're going to say, I'm a believer. And so it's my job is technical, in terms of capturing the data. It's also coaching in terms of enabling the client to find the right solutions, but it's also really bringing them into the fold as an advocate. And I mean, they're the reason I'm here. And so they really need to listen to how they feel and find the solution set that works best for them. Because those clients that feel better, that see the positive change, I'm not going to need to worry about compliance with them. They're going to run with it and continue educating themselves, educating their friends. And really, that's how we get the word out there. And then for the families, right? I'm a mother, and it's challenging to make inroads into schools in terms of removing wireless and adopting hardwired solutions. It's difficult, right? Everyone is used to Wi-Fi. Everything functions the way that they'd like it to, and you're very hard pressed to get them to remove it. And so the first thing people will say to me is, well, even if we hardwired, the students are going to trip over all the cables. And the interesting thing is, there are designs, there are classroom designs out there with the way that you can reconfigure desks to put the desks around the perimeter of the room and, run the cabling along the walls. And, and then you get into the fun part of how to design a classroom really well, not necessarily by having to buy or bring in any special furniture or, any new resources, but just be clever about how you install it, and it can be done. There are even desks.
It is being done.
Yeah, and there are even desks that contain Ethernet cables, Ethernet ports that you can hook a cable into. So, for all the naysayers out there, obviously, if you're in a high school classroom and each of the students has their cell phone on in their pocket, right? There's a lot of layers to the way that you would go to reduce RF exposure in a classroom, but the solutions are out there and they're less complex than you think to install. Ethernet cable to hardwire for internet can be installed relatively easily. And then the second piece of that, especially for those older grades, is really to create a safe technology policy. The teachers would love you anyway for asking the students to put the phones in airplane mode or put them in a pouch when they walk in the door. And it's not just from an EMF perspective, right? It's a distraction, and it makes teachers' lives more difficult. And so there's lots of different layers. I think if you were looking at hardwiring schools, I know that I've achieved the most success by starting with the lower grades. Start with the preschools, start with the K-2 schools, where there's not a great need for technology anyway. And I think that there are inroads that can be made. It obviously, as I said, gets harder as you get to the higher grades, but start with your home, start with the environment that's around you that you can control. And then, that would be the path forward for the schools as I see it.
Yes, thank you. And schools, when I was looking at colleges with my daughter, I got to go to a lot of colleges, and they, of course, went through that time, which hopefully most people, or maybe some people on the call remember, when everything was hardwired. So the school, of course, put in Ethernet jacks in all the dormitories. They have in the large lecture halls, there are these big tables, and they have ports where you can plug in your Ethernet for every one of those students, because that is how it was. And it exists. This information exists. It's just that we're moved so fast, faster than looking at the research, and forgotten. And we need to remember that knowledge exists, and there are experts who can help do that. And it is not that challenging to reduce the majority of those exposures, especially the ones where you're not even using your device. And you're like with the kindergartners, like you said, if they're not using it, why is there 3 Wi-Fi routers in a kindergarten classroom, which we have found to be
absolutely, yeah, and they're turned up full blast. And the interesting thing is, even if the school's not ready to take the step to hardwire, look at the existing wireless system. Can you lower the power level of those wireless access points in the ceiling in the classroom? Can you achieve the connectivity that's required and desired at 50% power strength, at 75% power strength? They're 9 times out of 10 turned on to maximum power strength because no one wants to have any lapse in connectivity, but maybe they would work just as well at 50% power, and therefore lower power strength, less RF emissions. Can they be turned off during the day? There are measures even in an existing wireless system that can be taken to lower the RF exposure. And that's really where, again, I see working with clients as a collaboration. When I have worked with schools, really collaborating with the school administration, but particularly the IT director or the IT contact for the school is your best bet, because that person, he or she knows the system inside and out. They designed it, they maintain it, and they're your best friend when it comes to making positive change in schools. They know their system. And once you explain your goal, and say, based on all the scientific studies, particularly for young children, let's just see if we can lower the exposure in the classrooms. And it can really be a fun and collaborative exercise, and you empower them, right? It shifts from me coming in saying, oh, Wi-Fi is bad, let's get rid of it, to, okay, here's the existing system. You're the expert. This is your system. Here's the goal I'd like to achieve. How do we get there? And that's a wonderful collaboration when it happens.
Great. Well, in light of the research that shows impacts to the brain and brain development, I can't think of anything more important than addressing that. I have several questions I wanted to get to as well. You mentioned radiofrequency radiation testing is a snapshot in time and place. Has anyone performed a complete RFR survey looking at RFR levels every 20 feet within 600 yards at different distances and at different times? And I want to put one part of an answer in just to say that in many countries, not in the United States, there are some real-time monitoring that's going on. Sometimes it's averaging and it depends on the country, but this is really needed in the United States. But I'd love for you to answer that, and also to add if you know other, because I know building biologists have a network, and if where in the country, has there been that? I know for lawsuits, that is what is needed in many cases.
Absolutely. And so, with a client, if there's a concern about a cell installation nearby, we will absolutely chart a grid, from their property as we move closer to that cell installation, and really capture all of that data in a very thorough way to understand the exposure. In terms of regular monitoring, I would say, I believe that Magda Havis's recent effort with her global RF monitoring project, where she is seeking volunteers from cities throughout the world to monitor RF in their town. And I know that some people have elected to volunteer to measure a main street at different intersection points on a one-time basis. And some are going back multiple times in a week. And some are going back month to month and trying to capture, again, RF levels in different cities around the world. One, to understand, are there places with lower RF that would be healthier for people to go and live or to move to if they were going to move, but also to just understand how much fluctuation there really is day to day. And because yes, these measurements are a snapshot in time. And so for my clients in their own home, data logging and RF monitoring over a certain period of time beyond just a snapshot can be really vital. And so, like I said, often you can do a 15-minute data log, a 30-minute data log, sometimes an overnight data log. And what's interesting, again, if I come back to the Safe and Sound Pro 2, but it really is a great consumer level meter, and it normally runs off of battery, but you can plug it into an outlet with a USB cable, and then it will run continuously. You can turn the volume off and leave it in a bedroom overnight and come back the next day. And you can look at that max reading and it will tell you the highest RF value measured in a 24-hour period. So is there RF monitoring at different distances being done on a regular basis? No. If that's something you're interested in, I would absolutely seek out Magda Havis's current RF monitoring project. And I would consider, if it's something you're really interested in, doing a bit of pseudo logging like that with a Safe and Sound Pro 2, or contacting a building biologist and having them bring their meters in and do longer term logging. And that really gives you a full snapshot of your exposure, because again, a snapshot is wonderful. It's an important value, but there might be fluctuations in a 24-hour period that you want to be able to capture.
Have you noticed, I have a question, and please put your questions in the Q&A. We're coming up to just finishing up, but if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. But have you noticed, Stephanie, more complaints where 5G and small cells have been deployed? What's the situation now? I know you've been in this a few years. So 5G is a complex topic that people have a lot of questions about for good reason. And what I will say with 5G, we're talking 5th generation cellular technology. It is not the 5G Wi-Fi band that comes with your Wi-Fi router, but it is the 5th generation cellular technology. And the interesting thing about it is we had 2G, 3G, 4G, LTE, and now 5G is the next generation. But what's interesting to note is that doesn't mean
5G doesn't take the place of 4G and LTE. It's an additive technology. It is still a new and emerging technology. And so not all of the questions, can be answered yet at this point. But the challenge is true 5G in the millimeter wave bands. I believe Verizon in our area is installing antennas that operate at 28 gigahertz. Now, the challenge with the true millimeter wave 5G is that the meters that can measure above, say, 10 gigahertz that I have in my toolkit are not widely available. Maybe it's a $30,000 meter to be able to measure those millimeter wave frequencies, which is a gap right now that is being addressed. And I know that there are companies out there working to create RF meters that can measure the true millimeter wave bands accurately, that aren't $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. But the interesting thing, but that's only a portion of 5G. If you look at a lot of 5G is actually being rolled out in the mid and low bands, and some of it is truly just advanced 4G. And the interesting thing with 5G technology is that it, as we understand it to this point, it is most likely beam formed, and a consumer would have a 5G enabled smartphone. And as they were walking down the street and the phone was seeking to connect, the signal would be beam formed to the phone. Otherwise, the antenna would stay off. But that's truly only in the millimeter wave case. But the challenge with the 5G installations in neighborhoods is a lot of them are truly 4G, advanced 4G, and they're going to be on 24/7. Think about taking the macro cell towers that we now see every mile or 2 miles, and they're becoming more dense and every few blocks in the neighborhood. The true 5G, they need more antennas closer together because those millimeter waves, because they're so high frequency, don't travel more than a block or two. But the challenge is a lot of these antennas combine 4G operating 24/7 that can travel far with 5G millimeter band waves that don't travel as far and may only turn on when someone walks by with a 5G enabled phone. So this can get really complex and a little overwhelming. And so what I would come back to is this. Please do not, if you're concerned about your EMF exposure, your RF exposure, buy a 5G enabled phone. Stick with your older phone that doesn't have 5G. And that way, if this beamform technology in the millimeter waves, you wouldn't necessarily be exposed to that from your own device. And then even if there is a cell installation and a new antenna put up in your neighborhood, it's scary and we wish it wasn't there. But if it is there, that's the time to buy your own meter as a starting point. It's going to be a detector. It's not going to give you a full range of understanding of what might be going on, but it's a starting point. Find a building biologist in your area or someone who does remote assessments and can rent you the equipment and go through it with you over the phone, or and do a remote assessment. Because honestly, what it comes down to, what we care about is your exposure, your RF exposure in the areas in your home where you spend a lot of time, where you're sleeping, where you're working, particularly. So even though there's a cell antenna a half a mile away, is it a concern? Maybe, maybe not. But what I always say is before it makes you nervous, seek out help, capture the data, because the exposure in my home from that cell tower is going to be different than the exposure level in my neighbor's home. Do I have lots of foliage and evergreen trees around? Well, that will mitigate RF to some degree. Is there a high-rise apartment building next door that might be blocking some of it? Okay, well, the point is, your exposure is so unique to your own particular living space, particularly the areas where you sleep, that yes, we wish that installation wasn't there, but if it is, just empower yourself with knowledge, have it measured, and have a risk analysis performed to understand truly what the exposure is.
Thank you. I think testing and retesting and what building biologists do is it's life-saving. I'm so thankful for the work of the Institute and the work that you're doing. And you have a blog. Could you talk about the resources that you have, how people can learn more? Because I really appreciated the work that you put out, and in kind of bite pieces, let's talk about this one thing, and that's how we operate, right? It's so overwhelming, this
Yeah.
whole issue. We have to break it down. So tell us about how people can get those resources. And also Environmental Health Trust is going to be sharing your blogs as well. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my company is Sage Living. It's www.sageliving.us. I have a consult button on my website. I am happy to sit down with anyone. Let's talk for 15 minutes. Let's understand your concerns. Let's give you a path forward, whether that is working together over Zoom, whether that's a simple phone consultation, whether I come to your home locally or I travel to come to you. Again, it's all about empowering you with data and knowledge to make changes that are really relevant to improve your health and well-being. And also, I have lots of blog posts on my website about different areas of EMF and health that are of interest to my clients. Often, I'll take some of the most common questions that I hear from clients, and I'll do a little bit more research and write a blog post about it. So, for example, Stephanie, how do I, you've come in, we've worked together, the EMF is really low in my home. Now I have to go on a work trip and I'm nervous about my EMF exposure in a hotel room. What can I do? And I can give you tools to lower your EMF exposure when you're on the road. So there are blog posts on my website that address things like that. I have a lot of the really valuable scientific studies, the Bio Initiative, of course, being really a vital document that I think it's over 4,000 studies that are distilled and discussed, and the different effects from EMF on health. And so there are a lot of great resources there. If there's a particular area of concern, I'm happy to address it. The building biology community is a very tight-knit, fairly small community. What we do is new to a lot of people. And so I'm on weekly calls with a peer group and a professional group. And so it's wonderful because I'm hearing about client experiences and solutions that are being installed all over the country from my colleagues, and we're sharing advice and sharing information. And so if a client comes with a really tricky situation, I'm here, but there's also a huge net of very talented building biologists out there that can help. And so it's a wonderful community to connect to and learn more about and become part of. And there are wonderful resources out there, not just the building biologist. The Environmental Health Trust does a phenomenal job. The infographics are phenomenal. If you are looking to educate yourself or your family or others in your community or your school, to print some of their posters and their flyers out. They're so valuable. Oftentimes seeing this information in graphic form can be more interesting and a little bit less daunting. Physicians for Safe Technology is another wonderful group. The resources are out there, and I can help you, and I can also direct you to a lot of wonderful resources.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to talk with you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Well, we will have this online for everyone to share as well. And thanks for joining us, Stephanie. And we'll also post links to your site and other resources.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Probably the most important thing I did, I was involved as a young scientist in the committee that actually reviewed the data and recommended that there be no smoking on airplanes. You may be shocked to hear that it was even a question for science at the time, but it was. And when I look at what we know now about mobile phone radiation, I see some very interesting similarities.
A growing number of prominent doctors and scientists are raising warning flags over radiation this morning, and your kids could be facing a greater risk of exposure.
I think the most important study is a study by the National Toxicology Program in a classic large carcinogenicity test, one of the largest ever performed, and for that matter, one of the most expensive. They found increased risk of the tumors, which we believe radiofrequency radiation is causing in man. Particular tumors called schwannomas. In the rats, they were in the heart. In humans, they're often in the nerve, the ear nerve, the vestibular nerve.
Cell phone providers say they follow all safety guidelines put into place by the FCC.
The current FCC safety standard was developed nearly 20 years ago.
The manufacturers actually tell people in the instruction manual, which I've never read, not to put the cell phone against your ear.
It does say exactly that. There's the BlackBerry, for example, warns to keep your phone at least 0.98 inches away from the body when transmitting. With an iPhone, for example, it's 5/8 of an inch.
At this point, the evidence has become sufficiently strong that cell phone radiation is a human carcinogen.
A major development from California's Department of Public Health. High use of cell phones may be linked to certain types of cancer and other health effects, including brain cancer and tumors, lower sperm counts, headaches, and effects on learning, memory, hearing, behavior, and sleep.
If it was a real problem, I would know. If it was a real problem, the government would protect us. How come I'm not hearing about this? They're all things I've heard when I give seminars. You know, I get up there and they say, oh yeah, if this was really a problem, they would have told us. I am they. I am a, legitimate scientist, and I am telling you.